And welcome to LawWiser. We are back again and we are going to be talking about green hydrogen policy, something we've discussed before a bit in detail where we talked about the basics. We also touched upon the national hydrogen policy, which was explained to us by our Rimali Batra. She is associate partner at DSK Legal, specializing in regulatory and policy. Welcome, Rimali, again. And since we had the conversation, we know there have been certain updates in this space of green hydrogen, which is picking up and trending a lot. There's been this new report, which is harnessing green hydrogen opportunities for deep decarbonization in India by NITI Aayog with RMI. And so we are here today discussing, what's in that report, how different it is from the earlier policy, and what else has happened in the meantime that, we can update you all about it. So welcome, Rimali.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Sana. It's a pleasure to be back here again and talking about green hydrogen. Thank you.
So as we had discussed, how promising is this new plan and the policy of green hydrogen for India? If you can touch upon
Yeah,
the report.
yeah, sure. So basically, this report that you just mentioned, which NITI Aayog has come out, in partnership with RMI, the report actually is outlining strategies for India to become one of the major producers of, green hydrogen. And it looks quite promising, I must say, because the report does spell out that India might have the largest green hydrogen generation capacity in the world by 2030, which is definitely very promising. And India's hydrogen demand is also anticipated, to be rising by, approximately 4 times, but that's somewhere around by 2050 is what they are looking at. The whole target, the way the tune and the tenor of the report was that by it's going to make India being the 10% of the world's hydrogen demand would probably be in India, right? So definitely the report, the plan, and the way the Indian government is moving is looking very promising.
That's interesting to know. And, that means, has there been any relook or detailing of the incentives, on this policy as we had discussed earlier?
Yes, absolutely. So the government has been at it, I must say, because in addition to all the incentives that I had listed out earlier, in our conversation, I now see that the government has, in order to open entry of more players in the sector, because honestly, the sector is going to be very player centric. Only a few players who understand and know the space would probably have an entry in the market. But now the government has offered incentives to startups, which is helping entrepreneurs through their incubation period and connecting them to investor networks, aiding them in implementing the rules, so that they are, enabled to manage a first mover risk, which the startups have. So that's essentially very important because it brings in a lot of low cost financing and is very important for bridging the markets. So that's something that's come up in this report. And additionally, the government is also looking at establishing green hydrogen standards and expanding the labeling program, which will be, under the standards of green hydrogen. Also, the government is, looking at alliances, green hydrogen alliances, which is primarily aimed at promoting exports of green hydrogen and green hydrogen embedded products. Apart from that, the government has also worked on, how the land space in terms of, this particular setting up of green hydrogen projects would work. So the government has come out with a detailed study, but in that sense, specifically, land and renewable energy parks could be used, for green hydrogen or green ammonia projects. The Indian government itself is planning to establish manufacturing zones, and any of the manufacturing zones can be used to build, the green hydrogen generating plants. Lastly, based on the state grant challenge, that was all discussed in the report, 3 hydrogen corridors should actually be built by, a period of 2030 across the country. So definitely, we're looking at a very promising future. There are a lot of incentives that have been detailed and discussed in the report.
It is kind of interesting to know because usually for such policies, at times we see, it's easier for the bigger players to participate. They have the infrastructure and the revenue, and encouraging startups is something, I guess, where the government is also focusing on, Make in India and all of those initiatives. So that's now moving on further. Lastly, we had discussed that, government had promised connectivity to green hydrogen plants, and this was pending for a long time. So Has there been any movement on these lines, you know?
Yes, absolutely. You're right. We discussed about connectivity as being one of the biggest incentive for green hydrogen, which is basically giving them a promising future. So if you produce, we'll give you connectivity, which is one of the most, lucrative incentives, if I can say. It's already an incentive, but it was one of the most lucrative incentives under the policy. Now, the government has further worked on this, and what they've come up with is that according to the recent update, these plants will be given open access for renewable energy sourcing within 15 days of receipt of a complete application. Now, that's literally like one of the fastest timelines for an open access application. And the open access charges, of course, will have to be paid in accordance to the rules. But the connectivity to the ISTC for all renewable energy capacity will, go through a regulation which has come in, and they will be dealt with on priority basis under the electricity rules of 2021, which have also been notified. So yes, it does look like the government has worked up on that particular incentive of connectivity and bringing in the operational bits and making it happen. So yes, it looks promising again.
Thanks, Rimali, for that update. And then we also spoke about the challenges in transportation and storage, right, during our last conversation. So if you can also highlight the developments that are there on this line.
Well, you're right. We did talk about, all the policy and infrastructural challenges. And one of the biggest challenges was, transportation storage, apart from production. Production, of course, has been discussed in detail and it's more operational, but it's discussed in the report. When we talk about transportation and storage, we really need to understand the underlying product. What we're talking about is hydrogen. It has properties such as flammability, low density, it's easy to disperse, it's also has a smell, and it's inflammable like we speak of. So technological advancement and would probably be required in permitting a very cost effective way to come up with storage and transportation of this particular product. Now, when we talk of storage in the first limb of it, storage can be done in, there are challenges, of course, and it has to be assessed on case to case basis. But when we talk about storages, the government is working towards bringing in more simpler and cost effective ways to store them in tanks. But there are going to be challenges, with respect to that as well. And the other is, storage, which is natural underground storage. Now, again, there will be challenge in terms of availability. The local availability could be very difficult, and it could not actually be a low cost solution. So to be able to, come up with the best plan, the government is really working on it, and the report does reek of, those ideas that the government is looking at. On the other hand, we're looking at transportation, and we understand that a product like hydrogen, which has to travel depending on the distance, the volume, and the state it is being produced at. Transporting can be done through either pipelines, which are obviously the most cost-effective way for transporting hydrogen across vast distances. There could be trucks, which could be used, for smaller transportation of amount, and both in different forms like gas and liquid, and it could be used for local distribution. And then there are tanker ships, which are regularly employed, and mostly they are used for transporting liquid hydrogen. But shipping hydrogen is expensive because of the conversion cost that comes with dealing with the product. Now, these are challenges I'm spelling out, but the report does speak about the government working on policies for making it work within these particular forms of existing storage and transportation opportunities. We'll see how the government comes up with different policies to bridge the gap and cover the challenges. So yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Rimali, for actually highlighting those aspects to us. Like you said, the government is consistently working and seems to be very serious about, promoting green hydrogen with the national policy, then with this new report. Of course, if the steps are taken in the right direction, India will be able to achieve those targets. So what are your thoughts on the transition, that's been stressed on towards the green hydrogen future?
Yeah. So I think that's quite an interesting question, because honestly, we are not like one country in the whole world, right? So the whole world is moving towards green hydrogen, right? So honestly, all the countries at this point in time, at least 43 countries, are already working towards strategies and roadmaps for a hydrogen economy, because that's the next big thing, that's the target, and that's how you can meet your environmental needs as well, going to a net zero emission target, which all these countries are really targeting at. So we're not alone in this race. Definitely, majority of government-related hydrogen R&D is being done at the moment in Europe, US, Japan, and China. But India is going to probably come in and gradually take a lead on this, considering the kind of demand we are trying to create in the jurisdiction. But that's only to happen maybe by 2030 or 2050. So that's the era we are really looking at. However, I'd like to add one thing, as something on the closing of this particular question, that India will have to steer clear, from having a complex policy regime on green hydrogen. What happens is when policies are made in bits and over a period of time, and that's how it is, that's the journey of a policy. The idea is to not make it complex, overlapping, confusing, and rather making it more welcoming for the industry to operate and for the end result to be achieved. So that's the fine balance, which the government will have to work on and steer away from complex regulations on green hydrogen. So that's just my thought on this.
Thank you so much, Rimali. Thank you for all your thoughts and for explaining it to our audience about the new report and all the developments that have taken place. And very well said, the government, of course, when it comes to ease of doing business and the focus being there, steering away from the complex policy would be one of the important steps towards it. So yes, hoping that that's not done and we have in the future a consolidated policy which is simple and easy to follow for
Absolutely.
businesses.
Absolutely.
So thank you so much, Rimali. Thank you for joining us again and explaining all about green hydrogen policy again to our audience. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for having me here. It was a pleasure speaking to you. Thank you.